Fraser Nelson is just the most wrong man in Britain, and he knows what he's doing at this point. He's just doing it for, like, the love of the game, I suppose. And he's lost credibility because the disparity between what he insists is the case and what we're just living through, the complete desolation of our country, is so vast that he has a very real risk of just falling in it. So he decided at Easter to use the occasion to glaze Islam, to insist that Islam is indistinguishable from various denominations of Christianity that were competing around the time of the Reformation and the Glorious Revolution. I mean, depending on your denomination, how glorious it actually is. This is something that I actually discussed with Professor David Starkey. I'll link the exchange down in the description. But the problem with this premise, before we get into Fraser's dreadful article, is that different branches of Christianity share metaphysics, a doctrine of good and evil, a belief in the death, resurrection, incarnation, a belief in Imago Dei, the inalienable dignity of the innocent human person, and a belief, as is mandated in the gospel, that we should render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and render unto God that which is God's. Which doesn't mean, if you read the Catechism, that you have to withdraw from politics entirely. You shouldn't be an ascetic. You can disobey or try to augment laws which are not in keeping with the Gospels. But it does mean that there can be some sort of political accord between Christian denominations beneath the state. But that's because they all buy into the same philosophical foundations. Other religions, Islam, Sikhism, Hinduism, any deviation that Judaism makes from the Old Testament, they don't share those givens upon which that settlement rests. There's no common ground or shared values that you can appeal to between those religions, less so the cultures that also emanate from the tribes that adopt those religions. And so the idea that, like, that's a one-to-one parallel, that you can just replicate the fraught compromise between Protestants, Catholics, and some Jews in Britain and across the European continent with Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs, it's just not going to work. It's a total pipe dream. If anything, the fact that the genetic proximity of the English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish, and that they shared a Christian faith despite the differences of denomination, was the cause of so many bloody conflicts. The fact that it was really difficult to try and reconcile the ability for us all to live on this isle together as a native population with a shared language, a shared faith. The fact that that was hard enough as it is means we shouldn't try it with the whole of the Indian subcontinent, sub-Saharan Africa, and Islamic terrorists. Fraser. But you seem insistent that we should. So anyway, on Easter, he published this dreadful piece, Beware the Politician Bearing a Cross. We're going to read through it and just rip it apart, because it's useful to frame our arguments in contravention to the lazy thinking put forward by establishment mouthpieces like the Times. One of the worst inventions of recent years is the politician's Easter blessing. It's now obligatory, it seems, but seldom edifying. When Robert Jenrick praises Psalm Sunday, he means palm. It's a small slip, but a telling one. They're still getting the hang of it. Well, of course, I wouldn't bank on Reform UK having a staunch Christian tradition, given that they seem more interested in Israel and appeasing Islam, per Nigel Farage's comments on the Winston Marshall show. The cross is becoming a must-have political accessory, part of a broader shift to a narrative about nation, identity, Islam, and threats to Western civilization. Counter-jihad is so early 2000s, Fraser. I know that you are really out of date. You are stuck in, like, 90s liberalism, and that you dismiss any evidence to the contrary with a kind of snobbish sneer and live in a bubble of blissful ignorance in your leafy London suburb, and are incapable of telling your Slavic wife apart from drill rappers from Somalia in social housing in SW1. I know that's how you exist, but the rest of us can actually see that, yeah, Islam is a real problem. It's also not the only problem, and that cultural change is downstream, inevitably, of demographic change. So even if all of the people that have been brought here since the 90s, let's say the 70s, even if they were all Christians tomorrow, Britain wouldn't be recognisable at the end of it. And so, because we never voted for this, because we actually voted against it in every election since 1973, And despite your attempts to gaslight us, as you said back in 2017, to just tell the public, we hear your concerns, and then just do the complete opposite anyway, despite your gaslighting attempts, the public still don't want it. It's still the number one issue for not just the party topping the polls at the moment, which is reform, but also in overall polls, that immigration is the issue. You do realise that the public just don't want any of these people here. They don't want their country rendered unfamiliar, even if you have this like broad cultural overcode of British values that's somehow capable of accommodating all of these cultures and faiths under one umbrella of like paying taxes, not killing each other, and playing cricket or something. And also, even if they were all Christian, it would still feel unfamiliar. It would still feel like you'd moved to Lebanon or Liberia without ever having actually moved. And that's really unpleasant for people. And that is a natural thing. It is not unreasonable to want to live around people who look, act, think like you. It's sort of psychologically reassuring. Diversity is actually really agitating for the somewhere people that make up the majority of the population. And so it's a completely reasonable demand to say, no, these people shouldn't be here. This isn't like the injection of Christian identity politics into an otherwise perfectly peaceful settlement. This is the reaction that people have to the erasure of their own identity and the prominence of imported identities that they didn't want here in their own politics and culture. He says, I can't pretend to be neutral on this. I'm from an unbroken line of Catholics who lived too remotely to be disturbed by the Reformation. I lived in Glasgow at the tail end of sectarian tension. We've really got to address the Scottish question. I mean, just Spectator, you've got Michael Gove, you had Andrew Neil, you've got Fraser Nelson. There's this weird thing with Scots. There's this weird hang-up where they think that because the Scots, like the Celtics and the Rangers, still battle over football matches, that means that if we can try and solve that problem, we can import the entirety of the Horn of Africa into our country and there'll be no issue. Like, it's just demented framing. Anyway, Neil Ferguson's the same. Still, Fraser says, I came to loathe religious politics and hid my faith. When the sectarian poison eventually drained from Scottish culture, I thought it was gone forever. Now it has returned, riding on the back of fair questions. With fewer people than ever in church tomorrow, are we still a Christian country? Well, Catholicism is on the rise. The Anglican Church is on the wane because, as Fulton Sheen once said, if the Church weds itself to the issues of the age, then it willows itself in the next. And, well, I would say the current Archbishop of Canterbury being a woman who said that her role in the Church was subversive back in 2018 is a sign of that terminal decline. Are Muslims a threat to British values? Are we ignoring the enemy within? To dismiss this as bigotry is to deny justified concern about genuine scandals, perhaps the worst of which being the grooming gangs exposed by this newspaper. Ironic that Fraser uses that example, because do you remember back in Christmas of 2024, Fraser Nelson published his last article with The Telegraph, and it was saying that Britain is an integration miracle and a beacon of hope amid instability. And this was the article that spawned a back and forth with Sam Bidwell, Max Tempers, Charlie Peters, and others in the start of 2025 that led to Elon Musk becoming aware of the grooming gang scandal, that sent it international, that retabled the issue of the grooming gangs in Parliament, and has led to the current ongoing attempt by the Labour government to delay and defer and weaken and cover up the need for a national inquiry into them. It led to Rupert Lowe's independent rape gang inquiry. The full report will be forthcoming. So Fraser Nelson inadvertently caused the fervour around the grooming gang scandal to be reignited with his deluded insistence that everything's just fine and dandy in Britain thanks to mass migration. And he then has the gall, 2 years later, to use that festering sore, that heinous crime that never needed to happen because the perpetrators never needed to be here, they could all be sent home tomorrow. He has the gall to use that as an example for why we should have limited hangouts to discuss the worst excesses of migration policy, while then rerouting your concerns back to the settlement he feels comfortable with, which is pluralism and diversity and won't you think of the food. Just disgusting. Like, they know what they're doing. They allow a little bit of truth to slip out to try and contain your concerns and stop the actual solution to these problems, which is just expelling these people from the country. Like, they just shouldn't be here to prey on children. But Fraser Nelson thinks that's worth the risk so that he can feel better about himself hypothetically solving sectarian conflict because he grew up with Scots disliking each other over the issue of transubstantiation. If the Times didn't exist, these people wouldn't have careers, I swear. Then we have the British-born jihadis, he says, the hate preachers and attitudes to women, the anti-Semitism, all problems cast into sharp relief after the 9/11 attacks a quarter century ago. Catch up. Haven't you forgotten a few attacks on our soil? I mean, London Bridge attacks, Westminster Bridge, beheading of Lee Rigby, Manchester Arena bombing, and then you can just talk about the non-Islamic terror attacks, like the Southport slaughter, based on anti-white hatred. It's weird that you don't mention any of those, Fraser, because they're all much more recent. And it's also strange that you talk about the anti-Semitism. I mean, of course, we had the terror attack on Yom Kippur in October, where jihadian from Syria went and shot up a synagogue. Absolutely terrible. But okay, if anti-Semitism is bad, why is anti-white racism from the exact same demographic also not worthy of mentioning? When it affects far more people in Britain, because there are far more white people in Britain than there are Jews, especially because the Jews are leaving precisely because of the Muslims. Like, weird that you don't mention any of this, Fraser. Since then, Britain's Muslim population has more than doubled to about 6% of the total and 10% of children. Gen Z is about 40% non-British. Total demographic disaster waiting for us. The change is visible. Women in headscarves are far more common sight than they were a generation ago. Is that scarf a sign of someone who is hostile to our values, a regression on the progress made on women's rights? It's a difficult conversation, but one we can't afford to ignore. We've had the conversation. We don't like it. The hijab, the burqa, the niqab, all Muslim veiling practices put the onus of modesty on women, and not because it is a good thing to not weaponize your sexuality and treat sex like something that is transactional and disposable rather than the enabling condition to having a family. Instead, it says that men shouldn't be expected to control their appetites, and that if women show a little bit of ankle, they are irresistible temptresses that basically deserve to be sexually assaulted. And we think that's vile. Like, we've always treated our women pretty well in England. Like, they've been able to own property for centuries prior to when they can in plenty of other countries, even today. Like, we believe in, as Christians, in the doctrine of Imago Dei, that men and women are made both in the image of God, that they're both capable of manifesting moral dignity. Islam doesn't believe that. So we've already had that conversation. We've all been having that conversation while you've been trying to shut it down, when you're at The Spectator, now at The Times, when you're sneering at it, when you and Freddie Sayers are discussing the real crime statistics on Unheard, saying, oh, pay no attention to the fact that your wife just got raped and you just got stabbed in the gut. Bike thefts are down. That's because people aren't reporting them, Fraser. Phone snatching's up, shoplifting's up. But just because, look at this graph. Pay no attention to Rome burning behind you. I have this graph to tell you that everything is just fine. It's just so exhausting. Allowing the creation of balkanized, almost closed communities was a calamitous error, born of a failure to talk frankly about mass immigration and what it meant. Okay, but that's the natural consequence of taking people from one country and transplanting them in another country. Like, people as a group act a certain way, which is why countries look like the way that they do. It's why there aren't random British people born in Burundi. It's why India looks like India, and when you move them to Southall, Southall looks like India. It's why when you take people from the Kashmir region and drop them into Bradford, it becomes a little Pakistani slum. Shock. And it's because these habits, culture, religion are just second nature to people. And so, actually, we didn't want them here in the first place. We don't want them randomly dispersed across the entire country with the hope that they integrate, while also importing more of them so they can cluster together and then form greater colonies all across the country. The colonies, the sequestered, sectarian, ethnic ghettos that are in our major towns and cities are the inevitable consequence of the immigration policy you support. You can't have one without the other. So trying to pry them apart is futile. If you didn't want them, you shouldn't have brought them here. But it's also an error to be blind to the progress now, the declining segregation and bridge building. Fucking where? Seriously, where? Take this newspaper's report about non-Muslim pupils trying a Ramadan fast along their Muslim classmates, curious to see what it's like to abstain in an area of instant compulsion. Right, they skipped lunch. But also, no, British children should not be participating in Ramadan. That is an act of submission. Because one culture that is not interested in integrating, that is interested in domination, whose various sects squabble not over whether or not there should be a caliphate, but over who should be appointed caliph, see that as an act of surrender. They don't see it as an act of coming together and participation. They see it as their culture, their religion, their way of life dominating ours. And so you going along with it is playing into their hands. You do not understand these people. You do not think like them. But if you just read what they write, if you read the writings of the apostates from that culture, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or Ed Hussein, you will start to understand it, and you will want it very, very far away from you. There's a Jewish school in Manchester where 80% of pupils are Muslim, drawn by the quality of education. Oh yeah, that's just been a recipe for nothing but peace in the Middle East, isn't it? That's going to end really well. For those of us who can remember an era where it was controversial for a Catholic boy to date a Protestant girl, well, because she should convert, all this is unexpected and precious. It's spilling over into streets and suburbs. During Ramadan, it has become common for Muslims to invite non-Muslims over for the meal after sundown. Okay, how many instances do you think there are of non-Muslim families joining Ramadan fast-breaking meals versus white girls getting raped by Muslims? Like, if we're going to weigh them up, and you're going to say, this is an example of success and this is an example of failure, how many failures do you think there are, Fraser, versus how many success stories? Because I think the success stories could probably be counted on two hands at most. Whereas there are a potential, according to Sarah Champion in 2017, million victims. There are girls that have been trafficked overseas, drugged, killed, sold as sex slaves by Pakistani Muslim gangs. But because your mate Abdul invited you to an iftar, that's all tickety-boo. It's just completely disconnected from the reality on the ground. Such acts of community, an active rejection of sectarianism, no, it's domination. You're participating in their culture. Like, when you're invited to a Shabbat dinner, for example, you are participating in the Jewish experience. And often, these are done in politics so that sympathy for Jews can be engendered among the Gentiles. And at that experience, Jewish identity, religion, is foregrounded. So you are mindful of the culture that you are participating in. You are invited to defer to their culture. So when you're doing the same for Ramadan, you are acknowledging the primacy, the authority of a foreign culture and faith, Islam, in that moment. You are granting legitimacy to that institution by your participation, your presence. And so the more people do that, the more empowered that religion, its traditions, its people become. And I don't want to empower Islam in my country, Fraser, because it does not, even if practiced peacefully, reproduce the Britain that my ancestors built, that my grandparents grew up in, that I didn't get to know, but I would like to someday. It will not reproduce that at the end of it. It will reproduce maybe a high-functioning Muslim country, but if I wanted to live in one of those, there are a handful of those, and there are plenty of dysfunctional Muslim countries, so the chances you're going to get one of the functional ones is also pretty low. And I could just go and move to any of those instead, where those people should be living instead. Open iftars, once rare, he says, are now hosted by football clubs, cathedrals, and even synagogues, from Inverness to Truro. That's a bad thing. And yeah, they are nominally open, but how many people go along and participate in them? Because, naturally, we self-segregate. We do things that we are accustomed to, that are our second nature, that are familiar to us, that feel inviting. So even if you receive a formal invitation to an iftar, you may not feel welcome because it is not your tradition. It's not how you do things. It's not what you believe. And so the more of these that happen, especially in public places like Trafalgar Square, in the Houses of Parliament, on royal property last year, the more of these that happen, the less welcome British people feel in their own country, and the more it feels like their culture is being replaced and primary consideration is being given to a foreign lobby. As Keir Starmer said, Muslims are the face of modern Britain. They are the future. That is a statement of intent, it's not a description. It was the big one, the open iftar on Trafalgar Square, which I just spoke about, that caught the headlines. Part of the ceremony is a short prayer where men and women separate. The whole event was intended as an act of cohesion with Jewish, Christian, and atheist guests, but if you're passing by during prayer time, as I did, it can look like Muslims closing off a national space. That's because it was. Just because you can participate does not mean they do not dominate that space, and it is an act of domination, just as it was when they prayed publicly outside Downing Street after October the 7th. That was also a statement of intent to repeat the same thing against unbelievers here in our country. You don't have to be Jewish. Christians also get beheaded according to the Quran. A Tory MP, Nick Timothy, said the praying was an act of domination that should never have been approved. Cue outrage. Nick Timothy then went on the Telegraph and said that there are moderate Muslims who don't even want this stuff. And it's just like, oh, okay, brilliant. We're going back to, like, liberal Hobbesian Leviathan counter-jihad to say, well, if it weren't for the far right that are causing division and these Islamists that have nothing to do with Islam pay no attention to the fact that they derive all their justification for their terrorism from authoritative hadiths and verses in the Quran, pay no attention to the fact that you're caught in the double bind that says, well, was Muhammad himself, their prophet, an Islamist, which is incoherent. If it weren't for the far right and Islamists, we would all just get along. We'd all be living in John Lennon's Imagine. It's like, what are you conserving here? Like, you're offering liberalism that won't work, and if you're not conserving the demographics and the people, and the culture and the faith, which is most intuitive to them, you're conserving nothing. You're just giving it away a little bit slower than the Green Party would. What was different this time was who rose to Muslims' defence. The Jewish News, whose editor was a guest at the iftar, published a thundering editorial defending open worship. They're not beating the allegations, are they? The sort of people pursuing Muslims now, it said, could come after Jews later. This reminds me of the Esset Goitin, Jews and Arabs book. In the introduction, he says there's a school of Jewish thought that thinks that Jews flourished better living as dhimmis in 7th to 13th century Arabia than they did living in Christian Europe, because that's where the Talmud was written, that's where they could barter and exchange, that's where Hebrew was preserved as opposed to Yiddish, the modified version, in Europe, and of course they were expelled from multiple countries across Europe. So there are plenty of Jews that think that actually if Britain became Muslim, it'd probably be more hospitable to Jews than if the English just regained possession of their own country from the incoherent multicultural mosaic full of stabbings and rapes that it has now become. It's like, well, that's just mental. But that is something that, like, Danny Finkelstein proposed, and you know, this is he writes for the Times, so this is a dominant belief in our country. I'm sorry, I don't want like a pincer movement of deranged, ethnically partisan, religious fanatics controlling immigration policy and dictating to me what my identity and culture actually is, so it accommodates them. Like, I don't want that, weirdly enough, and I hate that Fraser Nelson is basically the handmaiden for that. We saw Anglican bishops saying the iftar was an act of hospitality, not isolationism. Okay, you can say that, but it doesn't make it true, and it also explains why people are leaving the Church of England to go towards the Catholic Church, which, despite Vatican II, has a longer history of crusades. Muslims were doing exactly what was asked of them, reaching out to others, paying homage to their faith, and by gathering in Trafalgar Square, their country. No. Actually, the majority of the British public, upwards of 50%, especially reform voters, have a very negative opinion of Islam and think it's incompatible with being British. So what is being asked of them is to leave. So, actually, praying in public and hosting public events and taking up space in the nation's capital is the opposite of what's being asked for them. They are making a public demonstration of their presence. We would like for them not to be present. In an age when all religions are in a minority, well, yeah, in this country, but not globally, the Jewish and Anglican voices were not just speaking in defense of freedom of religion, but of the multi-faith democracy that makes these freedoms possible. Values come from religion. So, your liberalism relies, as Tom Holland has written well about, on a series of Protestant givens that you cannot guarantee. Islam does not share that. Literally just read their texts for how they think of infidels and unbelievers and Jews and Christians. Look at India. Sikhism exists because of 1,000 years of conflict between Hindus and Muslims that then plays out in cities like Leicester after a cricket match in 2022. We do not have a successful multi-faith democracy. We have a political system that is straining under the weight of trying to stop communities that they've brought into the country killing each other because they have ancestral, centuries-old blood feuds. We just don't need to live like that. It's a theme of recent years. Polls suggest Muslims are more likely than the general population to say they are loyal to Britain and to regard democracy as the best form of government. Okay, I'm going to need a link, because I've seen the Henry Jackson Society polling that says that 3/4 of them think October the 7th was justified, 52% want to criminalise depictions of their prophet Muhammad, and a third want to replace British law with Sharia law. And that's mainly concentrated among British-born, university-educated 18 to 30 Muslims. So the problem's getting worse, with Muhammad being the number one baby name. So don't think there's any evidence for that, actually. You know, what's the phrase? There are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics. Turns out that statistics is the worst kind of lie. We have the rise of events like Mitzvah Day, a Jewish-led initiative that brings around 35,000 people of all faiths together for various community projects. Again, be just sort of harming your reputation. There were the Drumlaring Accords, a formal declaration signed by dozens of Jewish leaders and Muslim denominations committing to mutual respect and shared values. It was presented to the king last year, by an imam at Leeds Mosque who works with Hope Not Hate. So this is just another act of dispossessing us from our own country. Fraser. This isn't multiculturalism, but instead people of all faiths, races and backgrounds coming together under one unifying culture, that of Britishness. Okay, you can declare that this isn't multiculturalism, but you've just redefined Britishness as multiculturalism. You've redefined it as the umbrella under which all other peoples, cultures and faiths shelter. You've redefined Britishness as a container in which other slop is poured. We are not a blank canvas onto which other cultures and identities are stitched. We are a people. We have our own distinct culture, a heritage, a historic faith, and that is being replaced by accommodating all of these other religions that you have decided to become the standard bearer of, Fraser. So yeah, it is multiculturalism, and that is anathema to Britishness, but you've tried to smuggle into the definition of Britishness multiculturalism while also pretending you haven't. You're just a liberal. You are just a liberal revolutionary. Nobody wants this. You are in the minority opinion, and this is why you get so much abuse on Twitter, to the extent of where you block everyone, including me. All this runs counter to the class of civilization's narrative. Yeah, but all the murders and rapes and terror attacks run counter to your narrative, and you just don't admit them. So, you know you're lying. You know you're doing this. How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? But it does chime with the national attitude. The social attitude survey shows only 1 in 5 of us think that being Christian is important if you want to be truly British. That's pretty terrible. Just 2 in 5 mention British ancestry. But 80% agree on a civic definition, becoming a citizen, respecting our institutions and laws. If you break that down by party, the party that is currently most dominant, which is Reform, the overwhelming number of Reform voters think that Britain is a nation of ethnic groups, not of random values. So the insurgent political movement believes that we are a people and we deserve to be prioritised in our own country. So you can throw up this squid ink of, well, everything's fine, look at my numbers. Everyone says that anyone can be British. That's not actually true. It's false. Lots of people recognise that it's false. And perpetuating that falsehood causes horrible atrocities to be visited upon us. It just didn't need to happen. The king isn't offering an Easter message this year, because he probably can't do it in Arabic, bowing out of a crowded field, but has done perhaps more than anyone in charting a way through this. As sovereign, he said he would defend all faiths, not in spite of his Christianity, but because of it. The former British chief rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, wrote about the need to overcome the sibling rivalry between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity and recognise the commonality. In all 3 faiths, he said, sectarianism is sacrilege. That's wild. That's not true of Islam. Sectarianism is not sacrilege. And also, the idea that Judaism has a very high opinion of Christianity after the Talmud is incorrect, and Rabbi Jonathan Sacks would have read those portions and would know that. So this is just not honest. There's no way we can just all live together and appeal to the fact that we all believe in one God and there is this shared Abrahamic root. The split happened thousands of years ago over fundamental truth claims about the incarnation of God as Jesus Christ, or the idea that Muhammad was the final prophet. He received the final revelation, that all of human history, everything that's ever been said and done, is written on a stone tablet in heaven, which he saw himself when he boarded a winged horse with the face of a man. No, you can't reconcile these fundamentally incompatible truth claims. You can't just skate over them either and pretend that everything's fine. Defending Britishness, multiculturalism, also means being clear-eyed about the failures of integration and how to remedy them. Deportations. But there are now more Muslim voices doing so. Baroness Shaista Gohir's Muslim Women Network has long been exposing the failure of police and social services to investigate child abuse in Asian homes. This is a totally wild example to use, because in Gohir's report, the Muslim Women's Network's 2013 report, she lists a number of examples, anecdotes from interviews, with Muslim men who say that young girls who wear high heels and makeup deserve to be raped. Like, they say, well, they're basically asking for it, and they run to their parents and cry rape because they're actually slags. There's even one story where a young man gets a call from his friend, I think it's his birthday party, and he comes around to a flat, and there's a girl who seems to be drugged out of her mind, being made to have sex with a constant procession of men, and those Pakistani men then call up their friends, their fathers, their brothers, their cousins, their uncles. One boy comes along with his dad, and the boy is still in his school uniform and has sex with the woman. It goes on for 6 hours, and they joke, bro, we should probably stop because we're going to break her and nobody wants to marry her. Like, what are these savages doing in my country? The fact that you, Fraser, would reference Gohir's work and that report means either you haven't read it, or you have read it, and you're deliberately omitting the fact that they have completely different attitudes about consent, sexual violence, the role of women, the dignity of children to us. And you are just papering over that, pretending everything's fine, and doing so has enabled the absolute worst crimes in our history. This is just disgraceful. You can find all those stuff, by the way, on like page 58 of the report. I'll link it down in the description. Just appalling. And it's appalling for you to pretend that this isn't a problem. Sectarianism clearly is on the rise, as witnessed by the Islamic candidates in Birmingham's local elections, telling voters that Zionists control everything. Or, the Green Party rocketing up in the polls, capitalising on anti-white resentment that hasn't been invented. It's just already there. It's the natural consequence of importing people from our former colonies into our country. The challenge is whether we can speak frankly about problems while looking for consensus, finding a formula for British cohesion. No. What you've done is lie. The challenge is to stop telling lies and start returning these people to the countries they came from. The King's definition that a Christian country is one that protects what Lord Sachs calls the dignity of difference is not a bad place to start. So you want to redefine Christianity as the enabling conditions for diversity according to a rabbi. No. Christianity is, as the Gospel of John says, the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody comes to the Father except through Jesus Christ. And so Christianity is incompatible with every other religion. And every other religion makes itself incompatible with Christianity. So, no, Christianity is not the glue that binds diversity together and allows everyone else to practice their own culture and their own faith and their own identity in our country. No, Christianity is not surrender, Fraser. Now, if you thought that was bad, Fraser Nelson has competition. Dan Hannan decided to write another piece on this phenomena of praying in Trafalgar Square. If religious freedom means anything, it must be for all, and that includes Muslims. Actually, no. No, doesn't. Actually, we can say that we don't have these like abstract ideological principles. We can say that we have a prejudice and a preference in favour of our identity, our culture, our historic faith. We can exercise that prejudice and preference, and anything beyond the boundaries of it just shouldn't be here. Because it is artificial, it is imported, it doesn't need to be here, it isn't welcome here, it's really quite unpleasant, and it can just go. And everyone who wants to practice it can go too. After saying non-believers can enjoy Palm Sunday processions and reenactments of the Stations of the Cross, Hannan writes, the same goes for the Sikh processions of Vaishiki, The Jewish costumes of Purim, unless you're in Iran. The colourful Hindu lights of Diwali. The communal sharing of food when the sun sets during the Muslim observance of Ramadan. Ah, maybe not. One of these is treated differently from all the others. I'm in favour of freedom of worship, but... Actually, you know what? I agree here. I agree. We shouldn't treat Islam differently from the others. We should just say, yeah, the others aren't British either. Like, they just don't really belong here. Like, we shouldn't be giving quarter in public to foreign faiths, traditions, and peoples. It just shouldn't be here. We're a Christian country. We've always been a Christian country. It's been one of the secrets to our success. And even if people are just nominally Christian or agnostic, church attendance is resurging among my generation. I hope I'm doing my part for that. I get texts from people all the time saying that I've influenced them coming home, as it were. But two, just because that's on the decline does not mean it should be substituted with faiths and traditions that will not reproduce our country. Dan, I know you're a demented liberal who thinks literally everyone is a blank slate and religion is like a cosmetic add-on, like a skin in a video game. It's just not the case, though. Yet again, we see the comparison with Catholicism and Islam in this article. Do detractors truly want the state to impose gender policy on faith groups, to force Catholics, for example, to ordain women? No, we don't want to meddle with Christianity, Dan. We just don't want non-Christian faiths in our country because we're a Christian country. But that's pretty easy to work out. We're not a liberal country, and all of the premises upon which you base your belief in freedom of worship, or freedom of religion, or even freedom of speech, they are Christian foundations. Why take your stand on these preposterous side issues? I think something deeper is going on. If you think, absurdly, being Muslim and being British are incompatible, what do you do with 4 million of your fellow citizens? You can put absurdly in there to go like a sort of snobbish, mock the weak style eyebrow raise of, aren't you low status of thinking that millions of Muslims can't just become British by declaring it? Doesn't make it true, though. And as for what do I do with 4 million of your fellow citizens, they should go to countries that are Muslim. Like, they can leave. If they're illegal, we should deport them. If they break the law, at any point, we can strip their citizenship and deport them. If they're on benefits, we take those benefits away, and they should deport themselves. If they commit a crime pursuant to funding their stay in our country without benefits, then we deport them. And then we have the power to start stripping citizenships, and I think we should. For plenty of people. Like, they shouldn't be here. Like, I can answer that question. Because I'm not ideologically wedded to building a liberal utopia. Defund, discourage, denaturalise, deport. That's what you do. It should go without saying that Britain has no space for religious extremism, let alone violence. Well, it does need saying, because it does have space for that, because Islam is increasingly dominant in our country and you're doing nothing about it. Because actually, what liberals do is tone police the people that come up with the solutions for the problems that liberalism causes. We don't want people to import foreign quarrels or sectarian conflicts. Well, that happens when you import the people. We expect a measure of restraint from immigrants. Tolerance works both ways. Okay, but they don't believe in that. Because they hold to a different religion and culture that doesn't value the things that you value, Dan, so your liberalism cannot be guaranteed if you import those people. Please understand. You do not think like them, you do not understand them, they are not like you, they never will be. But I come back to the question of what the future holds for 4 million British Muslims. Sunnier climates, hopefully? It seems to me that the best solution is integration. Okay, hasn't happened, won't happen, integrate into what? Bland, secular, liberal pluralism where the only meaning in life is paying taxes and avoiding prison? No. Based on the same sense of shared patriotism that led their fathers in the millions to volunteer in the 2 world wars. Patriotism comes from the paternal line, meaning ancestry, meaning ethnicity, meaning you inherit membership of a nation. Which means you pledge your allegiance to the nation-state that belongs to that nation. So to be patriotic, you have to belong to that nation. You have to belong to the family of families that is a nation. And if you aren't part of the British family, if you aren't English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish, then you might be deferential to the possession of the country by those peoples. But that's the reason why people who are not from those groups are often not patriotic for our country, but do have ethnic loyalties that lie elsewhere, to their home countries, even if they've never visited it, even if they weren't born there. Ask yourself this: does insisting Islam should be uniquely banned from public prayer make integration more likely, or does it vindicate the claim of the jihadi extremists that Muslims will never be accepted in Western societies? It is not up to Western countries to accommodate Islam. It is not our job to make concessions to our own identity to encompass its antonyms. I don't care what Western jihadis say about us. If they weren't here, they wouldn't be committing terror attacks, Dan. And inviting Muslims into the country inevitably causes terror attacks. Just look at the disproportionate rate that they commit them. So, does insisting Islam should be uniquely banned vindicate their accusations? I don't care. It shouldn't be here. There is reason that public Muslim prayer is backed by Christian, Jewish, and other religious leaders. Yeah, because they're cowards. They know that societies that drive faith from the public square become authoritarian, often outright despotic. We are not that kind of nation. We are not that kind of people. You can make declarative statements all you like from SW1, but the majority of people don't agree with you. They actually don't want Trafalgar Square to be dominated by Muslim prayer. They don't really want Islam here. Like if you gave them a button that they could press and it says Islam wouldn't be here, and everyone would just be teleported home, there would be no trouble, no violence, your nation would be free of Islam, you would see a majority of the public press that button. Bet on it. Dan Hannan wouldn't, though, because, as a liberal, he, for some reason, believes that Islam is a free market religion. He actually goes as far to say that Muslim terrorists are not real Muslims, which is totally insane. Quote, "The men who struck at the World Trade Center were deliberately targeting a symbol of global commerce, just as fascists and communists had done in the 20th century. The Nazis, for example, repeatedly aimed their bombs at London's stock exchange. Defeating authoritarian ideologies requires us to defend market capitalism as a moral force and poverty alleviation mechanism." Yeah, everyone is just a latent, freedom-loving, free market liberal who could work at the IEA. Like, for some reason, Islamists just haven't read Hayek yet. That's absolutely delusional, Dan. Like, the Arabist Oxford grad contingent must be banished from British politics. It's really quite intractable in the Conservative Party. They just derive their justifications from their scripture. Like, they say this. They say they're here to conquer. Believe them. And so we should be spending a hell of a lot less time listening to the likes of Dan Hannan or Fraser Nelson, because this isn't an Oxford debating seminar. This is the future of our country at stake, and I would quite like to raise my future children in a country that is recognisable, peaceful, prosperous, and works in their interest, rather than one that is dominated by foreign faiths that demands that they participate in Muslim rituals when they go to school.